This podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
The following podcast contains naughty language.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of May 13th, 2024. On this week's show, the Washington Post's Ben Golliver will join us to talk about the NBA's conference semifinals, where the Knicks are being held together with some kind of tape, and the Nuggets are not quite dead yet. Then Jackie Powell of The Next will be here to help us preview all the big storylines in the most anticipated WNBA season ever. And finally, one of the WNBA's top draft picks in 2023, Maddie Siegrist, will explain what the 2024 rookie class, including Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, can expect in their first year as pros. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the book The Queen and the host of an upcoming slow burn season on the rise of Fox News. Stefan Fatsis is still in Greece. Judging by the photos, I'm not sure if he's ever going to come back, though he claims he'll be here next week. Joining me from Palo Alto, Slate's own, the stalwart, Joel Anderson. Hey, Joel.
Hey, man, you disappointed I didn't run into Andrew Luck again this weekend?
I do have something for pre-show banter, even without you running into Andrew Luck. Play it, Kevin.
Oh no, Shannon Sharp, man, you're way beneath me. Your whole demeanor is faker than new rapper Beefy. You're soft. Before you get fly, you rather tweet me. I was in 3 different cars when you was in 3C. All I see is dollar signs. They come in 3D.
I know what side of the beef you're on. You're, as an LSU fan.
I was a little bit ahead of, that's what you get from Hang Up and Listen. You knew there was just something calling me to do the Shaq Kobe rap beef in last week's Afterball. I knew that the Shaq Shannon Sharp rap beef of 2024 would be upon us. And it's like about Shaq thinking SGA should be the MVP and Shannon thinking it should be Jokic. It's a very funny subject for a beef.
I have not seen the clip, but apparently he told Nikola Jokic that he didn't think he should have won the MVP, like, in the middle of an interview, say, well, I think SGA should have won, which is, that's very Shaq of him, isn't it? I mean, Shaq's biggest criticism of every big man is like, well, if you're not Shaq, I mean, you're not really living up to expectations, and that's what I need a big man to do. You got to be Shaq.
Sounds like you're on the Shannon Sharp side of the beef.
Oh no, I'm neutral. I'm neutral in the beef. It's very appropriate. I spent all weekend writing about Kendrick and Drake for Slate.com. So
I saw Janae tweeting about how you were explaining the beef to your 2-year-old child.
He heard Meet the Grams as I was playing it on the TV. And probably not the best parenting decision, but I had to run out the clock. We needed a little... I had to do a lot of things this weekend.
Now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. And we want to let you know that in our bonus episode this week, Jackie Powell of The Next is going to stick around to talk about the WNBA. We're going to talk about A'ja Wilson getting a signature shoe. We're going to talk about the league's TV deal and where it's headed as it's about to expire. A bunch of really interesting topics as the season is about to tip off. If you want to hear this week's bonus episode, it is available right now. And if you don't subscribe, there are 2 ways for you to hear it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking try free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. With a little more than 20 seconds to go in the first half on Sunday night, the Nuggets were up just 56-49 on the Wolves. Then Kentavious Caldwell-Pope hit a 3 to put Denver up 10. Then Anthony Edwards lost the ball, leading to a breakaway dunk by Michael Porter Jr., Denver up 12. And then we'll let TNT's Kevin Harlan take it from there.
Court length, that's intercepted. Murray, good if it goes. Got it! A big time 3!
That was a 55-foot buzzer beater by Jamal Murray. What the audio does not capture is the face-to-face nature of the post-shot celebration between Jamal Murray and Kevin Harlan. That was an 8-0 run by Denver in the last 20 seconds of the first half, and it was the decisive margin and the Nuggets' 115-107 win over the Wolves. Series now tied up 2-2 after the defending champs had lost the first two games at home to Anthony Edwards and Minnesota. Joining us now is Ben Golliver of the Washington Post and the Greatest of All Talk podcast, who was at Game 3 in Minneapolis but skipped out on Game 4 to watch the Atlanta Hawks win the lottery for what the experts say is going to be the worst NBA draft this millennium. Ben, we're very grateful that you're here, but given your recent track record, I'm guessing there's something way more exciting that you're missing to be on this podcast with us.
Absolutely not. But you make me sound like a sicko. Don't you like the draft lottery, Josh? The Wizards got number 2. You got to be excited, right?
Thrilled. But, you know, I don't want to get my blood pressure too high, so let's go back to the Nuggets-Wolves series. How did the Nuggets turn the series around?
I mean, they flipped it completely upside down when they shifted from Denver to Minnesota for Game 3. It was like every factor that we were tracking. Minnesota's incredible offense, Minnesota's physical defense, Denver's offense and stars not really being there. Denver's defense really having trouble with Anthony Edwards. Pretty much everything flipped on its head for Game 3. I felt so bad for the Timberwolves fans because they showed up and the public address announcer said, "You guys have been waiting for this moment for 20 years." And the crowd goes crazy. They're all wearing matching t-shirts. They're actually excited to wear the matching t-shirts, Josh, during the playoffs. They're swinging these white towels over their heads, and then they just got completely ran off the floor. And in Game 4, was there any doubt in your mind?
They didn't know how appropriate the white towels would be.
Oh, they didn't. And in Game 4, Jamal Murray hits that half-court shot like you mentioned. Was there any doubt it was going in? Everything Denver threw up in Game 4, it felt like it went in. Aaron Gordon, almost a perfect night from the field. Joker, so many clutch baskets down the stretch. I think the story of the series right now is Denver getting its offense back on track after really looking ugly and struggling in the first two games. And Minnesota now searching for any sort of offense besides Anthony Edwards. Michael Malone had a very astute observation after Game 1. He said the Timberwolves are really tough to deal with when they have 3 or 4 guys going on offense. We can sort of live with Anthony Edwards going nuts, and they're probably going to have to live with Anthony Edwards going nuts because he's played great this entire playoffs. But when Karl Anthony Towns is struggling, the shooters are struggling, Rudy Gobert is kind of clogging up the paint and kind of screwing up the spacing there in the middle, it starts to grind down for Minnesota, and I think that's how Denver's surviving right now.
You know, Ben, so many people who follow the NBA that I respect, and Zach Lowe was one of them. I saw him predict that the T-Wolves are going to go up 3-0 at a minimum. And I was just kind of like, as good as Minnesota has been, all of the things that we've known about them for the last couple of years have essentially come up in the past 2 games, right? Like just dumb fouls. And most importantly, on the night Rudy Gobert gets his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award, which ties him with Dikembe Mutombo and Ben Wallace for most ever. I mean, Jokic just went crazy. If Gobert is getting played off the floor in playoffs, how could people have missed all this stuff, right? Obviously they played really well, but it seems like the old T-Wolves kind of crept back up in these last 2 games too.
I think that's part of it, but I have another theory for you, Joel. I think it's the Jokic propaganda guilt complex. Now, I think a lot of the loudest voices who were paranoid and scared about the Nuggets after Game 2, deep in the back of their mind, they were thinking, and I'm guilty as charged here, I've been hyping up Joker for the last 4 years. Game 2 was just about the worst game he's probably played in 5 to 6 years. It was a massive, quote-unquote, must-win type of game after they lose Game 1 at home. And you're thinking, if Joker can't step it up for Game 2, something's wrong. This entire thing is going to fall apart, right? And we know this concept of the feel-out game. I mean, maybe this is a new layer to Joker's greatness. He's going to have 2 feel-out games at the start of a series before he decides to turn it on for Game 3. I don't know. We'll see. But your points on Minnesota are very well taken. You know, I mentioned the crowd in Game 3. Just incredible. They really brought it. But Anthony Edwards is just dancing all over the court before the game. He's fresh off Good Morning America, where he's talking about, hey, I got a jumper, and maybe Michael Jordan doesn't. They do this huge pregame celebration where they give Karl Anthony Towns his Social Justice Champion Award. They give Naz Reid his 6th Man of the Year trophy. It just felt like there was distractions. They had taken their eye off the ball. it felt like they believed the hype. And I think that was the problem. They didn't have the competitive edge that they had in game 2, where they played basically the best defensive game I've seen a team play in the last 5 years in a playoff game against an elite offense. They just didn't have it in game 3. And so now you do start to nitpick this group. Well, Kyle Anderson, one of their bench guys, you can't even really play him anymore. He's really been a problem. They haven't been able to get the supporting shooting around Edwards, so all the burden's falling onto him. Karl Anthony Towns, I think, was the definition of doing too much in game 4. I mean, just way too many shots, too many fouls 40 feet from the hoop. I mean, just kind of a tough watch all around. And the central question's Gobert, right? It's like if the defensive player of the year can't even hang at all with the MVP, you're not going to be winning this series.
It's a really fascinating dynamic heading back to Denver. And the big question with the Wolves all year was their offense. Even when they were rampaging through the Western Conference, it was because they had the top-ranked defense. It wasn't because they had guys lighting it up from the floor. And so I think the game 2 was the best that they could possibly play, probably at both ends. And now the narrative around the team, I think, as Joel alluded to, is, you know, they've got all of these questions, not only about these, you know, big salaries that they're paying to Towns and Gobert and Edwards and whether they can keep this team together. They've got questions around the ownership group and what the hell is going on there. And, you know, reports that, you know, maybe they're not willing to spend money on the team going forward. And it's just so amazing how you can go from, in the span of a couple days, this team is going to win the NBA title and they have Michael Jordan, to like, do we need to break them up? They have nobody except Anthony Edwards who's any good. What's even going to happen with this franchise? I mean, obviously, Ben, the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle. But you know, if you were forced to like issue a hot take, are you kind of more optimistic or more on the pessimistic side of the Wolves continuum here?
Well, I think my hot take would be teams should have one ownership group. I mean, super scorching take, but you should see it at these games, guys. You've got Glenn Taylor sitting right next to the Timberwolves bench. Directly across the court from him is Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry and that group, right? They do not interact. They don't talk. You don't really see the players playing favorites or going up and dapping up the owners like you sometimes, you know, see with other teams. I think because they're kind of, you know, stuck between this awkward like divorce negotiation. They're the kids. They don't want to take a side. You know, it's really, really weird. So, you know, it was all coming very quickly for the Timberwolves in those first 2 games, and they really just need to reset. I have some faith in Chris Finch. You know, I think he's a really good coach. He's going to have to figure out how to adjust. What Denver did so well is they took some of the pressure off Murray, bringing the ball up the court, putting the ball in Joker's hands actually early in possessions to just limit the wear and tear on Murray so he doesn't have to just get, full court press time and time again down the court. That really opened up things for Denver's offense, and it helped Aaron Gordon get more involved as well. Minnesota is going to have to figure out some, similar issues. How do you get someone else going? Is it a matter of Mike Conley's got to just get hot from 3 and that will fix everything? Because when he's been shooting the ball well, their offense definitely looks better. Is it something more radical, like maybe what Joel was suggesting, which is limit Gobert's minutes, maybe, go a little bit smaller, live with Joker going crazy inside and see if you can, spread out and get some more outside shooting going. I think it's going to be on the adjustments offensively for Chris Finch is how Minnesota is going to reclaim some dignity, because they are an incredibly expensive team. There's been trade rumors around Cat going on 4 or 5 years now. No one would be shocked if he got traded this summer in any way, especially if they go out in round 2. So this does feel kind of like their moment, and we have no idea if they're ready for it. And when you look at their main personalities, obviously Anthony Edwards is young, but Gobert's never made a conference finals. Karl Anthony Towns has really never done anything in the postseason. Mike Conley has made a conference finals, but it was years and years ago with a different construction with the Memphis Grizzlies. So all the pressure is on them, in my opinion, as Denver goes back home for Game 5, and we'll see if they can stand up to it or not. I mean, history says these guys have tended to, slink away from the bigger moments once they've gotten there.
Yeah, imagine having to win 2 or 3 in Denver. But let's move on to another series. And I'll give our listeners a peek behind the curtain at our show notes written by our good friend Josh here. Knicks got their asses beat. which does about cover it. I mean, the Knicks lost by 32 in game 4 to even that series up at 2-2 as a series shifts back to New York. So, Ben, yes, they got their asses beat. But I think, I mean, is the excuse here that, well, this is what happens to a Tibbs team. He runs them down into dirt, and here they are, and they've got nothing left for the stretch run of the season here.
No, you read my mind. I mean, this is the Tibbsiest team that Tibbs has ever Tibbsed. You know, I mean, that's just really what it is. I mean, he's had this, it's the same pattern, whether it was Chicago, Minnesota, now New York, where he trusts his main guys. He will play guys 48 minutes, stuff that just really never happens from any other coach in the modern NBA. He's done that with Josh Hart pretty much all playoffs. The usage rate on Jalen Brunson has just been absolutely absurd. And because they have been so good at executing in late game situations, and you want to give some credit to the amazing Madison Square Garden crowd and maybe influencing some officials in certain situations. I mean, they've really taken advantage of home court, but you saw it all come apart on the road in game 4 because everyone was flat out exhausted. They've had so many injuries. And to me, the OG Anunoby one is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back because he plays huge minutes. He's a big-time two-way impact maker, crucial for their defense, but he's also was scoring really well in the game right before he got injured. He was having one of his best scoring nights probably of his career. So they don't have anyone else to really go to in that spot. And now we'll just see can Brunson, pull off 2 more miracles. I think I would rather be Indiana at this point with the series tied 2-2, feeling like you have a little bit more depth, feeling like you're starting to get your groove, feeling like you're playing against half the Knicks team instead of their full roster, than I would be New York, even though the Knicks have a home court advantage still.
If you had to guess, do you think that Tibbs looks to the bench and tries to sub in Joakim Noah like multiple times a game?
He's had a lot of those guys over the years, like Taj Gibson.
Gibson,
yeah.
I was about to say.
How is Taj Gibson not playing 48 minutes in Game 7? I think that's the biggest question. But, I mean, he even got some pretty good run out of Alec Burks, right? Like, when's the last time we've really seriously considered Alec Burks as a basketball property, right? Like, it's been a while. So, Tibbs, you give him credit. This was a team that coming into the season, I didn't think would even make the second round. But I think that the expectations ramped up real quickly for them when they beat Philadelphia. Everybody just kind of penciled them into the Eastern Conference Finals and this dream showdown with Boston where you have these 2 kind of historic franchises. And it might not happen. We might get a completely different series.
Why are we overlooking that the Pacers were the in-season tournament runner-ups? I mean, obviously, this is where they, their resilience was forged in that fire.
Well, I had a great time at those games, actually. And I think the big difference is Halliburton's finally getting back on track, a little bit. The guy we saw in December dancing all over the court and talking trash to the Milwaukee Bucks and really having his breakout moment in Las Vegas in that semifinal game has been missing in action for a lot of the playoffs, and it feels like maybe he's starting to get his groove here.
The big moment of this series, the turning point, correlation-wise, if not causation-wise, was the Pacers sending a complaint to the NBA over calls and non-calls from games 1 and game 2. 78 of them, Ben, that they said were wrongly decided. What did you think when you heard that the Pacers had sent in this rundown of 78 calls to the NBA, and also of their coach, Rick Carlisle, saying small market teams deserve an equal shot. They deserve a fair shot no matter where they're playing?
Well, my favorite part about that is that Rick Carlisle is one of, I would say, the world's least convincing actors. Like, he gets into this kind of shtick mode, and he did this actually. Do you remember when Giannis stole the game ball after the whole brouhaha with his career high and the Pacers? There was a confrontation in the tunnel, and Rick Carlisle, had a post-game press conference, and he was very fake indignant. One of our guys got pushed in the chest, and he was, really laying it on thick, just as thick as he did here over these foul calls. But when you really watch the tape of Carlisle doing this, is his heart really in it? Is he committing to the bit? Is he just kind of saying the words he feels like he needs to say to draw the fine and to spark the conversation about the small market referees? To me, I think it's just gamesmanship, pure and simple, and I don't think it made a huge difference in this series. I think the right team won all 4 games, and the Knicks have been getting, a lot of accusations of homer help, right, at Madison Square Garden, and I do think there's like in game 2, for example, against Philly, when they're mugging Tyrese Maxey late in that game and they pull off the incredible comeback. There's some missed calls there, but they were on the short end of the biggest call in that first round series against the 76ers when Embiid, pulled on Mitchell Robinson, only got a flagrant rather than getting ejected. So I don't think it's been overwhelming in their favor. And I think ultimately this one's being decided on the court, not by the refs.
We haven't talked about the other 2 series here, but what have you seen from those? Like, what could anybody take from, the Celtics-Cavs series or the Mavs-Thunder? Obviously, the Celtics are up 2-1, Mavs are up 2-1. It seems like things are kind of going about as expected in both those series.
Yeah, I think for Boston, they just continue to torture their fans with their losses. That's probably the most interesting thing. If you turn the game on and Boston's down in the first quarter, just, get on Twitter, see how they're handling it. Usually it's not going very well. They should continue to coast. And to me, the big takeaway from the Eastern Conference here is that Boston just has this red carpet straight to the finals, given how many injuries have happened to other key players, whether it's Embiid, Giannis, Dame Lillard. Those guys are already out. Now half the Knicks are injured. It could not be setting up better for the Celtics to reach the finals like they did a couple of years ago, even though they've dealt with their own injury with Kristaps Porzingis. On the Dallas-Oklahoma City side, I still feel like this series has not fully shaken out or settled. We saw a great performance in Game 1 from Oklahoma City, but an even better response from Dallas in Games 2 and 3. Luka's starting to get it going. Kyrie's been having a nice postseason after probably 4 or 5 years of the playoffs where he was kind of a non-factor after that 2016 title run. And then the big X factor for them is PJ Washington. They make this big trade at the deadline to go grab him. I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, they're going all in for this guy. But when he's making all of his 3-pointers and he's like, deciding playoff games, you look back and say, hey, that trade's looking pretty good. So, we'll see. I think right now, probably the favorites to come out of these brackets in my mind would be Denver versus Dallas. Maybe you get Joker versus Luka in the Western Conference Finals. And that out east, I would take Boston and Indiana at this point, given the state of the Knicks roster and injury issues.
Ben Golliver writes about the NBA for the Washington Post. He talks about it on the Greatest of All Talk podcast. Ben, thank you for just calming down after the Wizards got the number 2 pick and just having a kind of cool head and being able to talk to us today.
Oh, I'm glad to do it. And I'm just trying to take my cues from Wizards GM, Will Dawkins. He didn't even smile when they won it, Josh. He didn't even care. So maybe that says something about his personality. Maybe it says something about the quality of the draft. I'll leave that to you guys, okay?
Thanks, Ben. Coming up, Jackie Powell of The Next helps us preview the WNBA season. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity. Much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these 2 policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the home gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase, every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Terms apply. The 2024 WNBA season tips off on Tuesday night with 2 games on ESPN2, the second of which features the defending champion Las Vegas Aces and their star A'ja Wilson taking on Brittney Griner, Diana Taurasi, and the Phoenix Mercury. And I think it's fair to say that's the second most anticipated game of the night, since Caitlin Clark will be making her WNBA debut for the Indiana Fever at the Connecticut Sun. a game that, according to ESPN, will be produced at a level beyond even a WNBA Finals game, with overhead cameras, slow motion cameras, and a production crew 3 times as large as the typical game broadcast. Joining us now is Jackie Powell. Jackie covers last year's WNBA finalist, the New York Liberty, for the women's basketball site The Next, and talks about the WNBA on the Locked On Women's Basketball podcast. Jackie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. It is an honor, and I'm really excited to get into it.
There is a lot we want to cover, but first, as someone who's been covering the league for a while and following it for longer, what are you most looking forward to seeing as Caitlin Clark makes her WNBA debut this week?
I mean, to be quite honest, and as you said, as someone who has reported on this league for a while, I'm really excited to see how the Fever's opponent, the Connecticut Sun, and that was last year's second best defense in the league, will guard Caitlin Clark. Stephanie White, the Suns head coach, was the 2023 Coach of the Year. And the Suns' style, they play a high-pressure defense, which is going to be probably closer to how Nika Mule of Connecticut and Raven Johnson of South Carolina guarded Caitlin Clark. But I'd say even the pressure is going to be upped from what Caitlin Clark saw in those Final Four games. And Clark may have a 6'2" power forward in Alyssa Thomas switching onto her in this game. So just sort of seeing how Clark deals with that in real time is going to be fascinating.
I was fascinated by the fact that her coach, Christy Sides, actually criticized Caitlin Clark after the last preseason game. She said there's times she comes off ball screens where she's open in that long 2 area, and we got to get her comfortable taking that. I gave her a rule the other day. She's got 0.5 seconds to make a decision when she gets off the ball and hits somebody in the high post. And she talked about habits that she has to break. Were you surprised, knowing Christy Sides, that she wasn't like, she's just a rookie, she's learning things, that she actually had some criticism?
Oh, I'm not surprised at all. And that sort of speaks to the type of coach that Christy Sides is, because, and the reason I'm not surprised is that 0.5 second that you're referencing, those 0.5 second decisions, that is a typical thing around the WNBA, especially on teams where their style is this read and react type style. Caitlin Clark is not necessarily used to that being the norm all the time. In the WNBA and on some teams in particular, there aren't necessarily these set plays. It's more you are making different reactions. You're using your mind at a much higher level. And so I think, obviously Christy Sides and her whole staff are going to give Caitlin Clark some grace. But at the same time, I think it's a quite brilliant tactic, because there's been a lot of narratives in the media about how Caitlin Clark is just going to destroy the WNBA when she gets to it. And that's just not the truth. And so I think Christy Sides being that intentional with her criticism, I think that sort of tells people, and that tells reporters who maybe don't have a great understanding of the league, that the WNBA is at an incredibly high level. It is such a higher level than the college game. And so someone who was fabulous in college even has their growing pains. And so that's just a tiny example. And that's not even on the defensive end, which is sort of where we thought Clark was going to have most of her growing pains.
So, Jackie, speaking of destroying the WNBA in an incredibly high level, the Las Vegas Aces, they're the defending champs, 2-time defending champs, and last year lost only 1 game in their playoff run. So, they have a chance to three-peat this year. Candace Parker retired in the offseason, not too long ago, but they still bring back Asia Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, Kelsey Plum. I mean, it seems like they're well positioned to go ahead and run up a 3rd straight championship, right?
So I say yes and no, and let me explain why. So based on what you just said, sure. And the people who they signed in the offseason, they signed Megan Gustafson, who is an Iowa women's basketball alumna. She's a good bench stretch center, but she's not a superstar. You're not bringing a superstar off the bench. I also will say Chelsea Gray has not been cleared to play. She did not play in the Aces exhibition against the Puerto Rican national team. And Becky Hammon was like, oh yeah, she's day to day. Also, when you sort of see her walking around, like when the team walked to the White House, she was limping a bit. So I really think that's something for Aces fans to be monitoring. And, you know, Sydney Colson started that preseason game. And I think, you know, we've spoken about it for years, how the Aces have struggled when it comes to their depth. This is another year where they're going to struggle when it comes to their depth because their bench has a lot of unproven folks on it. They have these two rookies from the 2024 draft in Deasia Fair and Kate Martin. You have Kirsten Bell, who is still like a wing that's sort of developing, but she hasn't been she's not really established yet. And so there are real concerns on their bench, and people must be like, oh, but there were concerns last year and they still won. When you have Chelsea Gray not at 100% for more than just a game, I think there's some more concerns there.
And Jackie, real quick, because I don't want to like overlook the Candace Parker of it all, right? Because, I mean, she was just a piece on that team last year, but obviously, like, we're talking about, you know, one of the greatest players in women's basketball history. So not only, I mean, what will the Aces miss, but what will the WNBA miss by having Candace Parker retire?
Oh my God, yes. The WNBA is going to miss Candace Parker oh so much. Not just because of how she plays the game, but also how she talks about the game and how she is when she's interacting with reporters, how she's so open about this league's evolution on a day-to-day basis. I mean, she was an absolute pleasure to cover toward the end of her career. I got to cover her during her WNBA finals against the Phoenix Mercury when she was on the Chicago Sky. And she just had such a willingness to talk about some pretty, I guess, holistic issues that the WNBA has been dealing with for so many years. But when it comes to her play, obviously, I mean, the fact that she was able to take a team that had never won a championship before and provide the leadership that she was able to, and I'm talking about Chicago, I mean, that was unbelievable. I mean, they were a team at around 500 before the playoffs began. And then that playoff run, they transformed in weeks into a championship team. It was absolutely fascinating. So yes, the WNBA will miss Candace Parker a lot.
Speaking of holistic issues, charter flights have been an issue in the league for years, and they were allowed during the playoffs, not allowed during the regular season. Your colleague Howard Megdal reported on Joe Tsai, the New York Liberty owner, right, getting into pretty massive trouble with the league for flouting the rules and wanting to have charter flights when they were not allowed. Well, this past week, there was an announcement there are going to be charter flights. The league is committing $50 million reportedly over the next 2 years so that teams can fly charter to every game. What have you heard about that? And what do you think about it, Jackie?
First of all, I'll address the latter first. This is incredibly significant. And this has been something that players and ownership groups, as you just said, have been fighting for years. And the main repercussions in WNBA players and teams not being able to have charter flights is that the schedule is so tight, player recovery is really stifled when they have to adhere to a commercial flight. And it just makes for a less entertaining and less excellent product. I mean, there are often times where you watch games where a team came off of a horrible travel situation. I think it was the first time the Liberty played the Aces in last year's regular season. They traveled from Connecticut, and traveling from Connecticut to get to Las Vegas is a huge pain in the butt.
Even in the NBA, where every team flies charter, there's data that shows that teams that have, fewer travel days perform much worse.
Exactly. So
you can imagine just flying commercial, how much worse it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think while this is fabulous news, what is most concerning is that the league hasn't been willing to really provide information, not only to the media about how all of this is going to work, because as you said, this concept was rejected just a few years ago. And it was also rejected last year when, obviously, for Brittany Griner, there was a real concern. And she was even harassed and heckled at a Dallas airport. But not only do us media members not know much about the how when it comes to, okay, well, why now? General managers around the league and executives around the league were just as shocked as we were when we heard that Cathy Engelbert dropped this bomb in a closed meeting with sports editors. And they were wondering, executives around the league, they were like, okay, we've booked our travel already. Are they going to be able to get a refund? That's what they were wondering. These were questions that executives were asking. And so they're also wondering, well, when actually will this start? Because the season is starting, look on my calendar, tomorrow. And so I can tell you all actually that there will be charters used for the first games of the season, but they won't be used and allowed for all teams in the WNBA for the first 2 games of the season. So what I know is that the Minnesota Lynx and the Indiana Fever will be getting charters for their first couple of games. The Minnesota Lynx are traveling to Seattle, so that is a long flight. And the Indiana Fever, they are going to Connecticut. As I griped previously, that is going from anywhere to where the Sun play in Connecticut is just a hassle. It doesn't matter where you're going from. It is so hard to get there. And I can tell you that, you know, for a team like the New York Liberty, who goes from, they're playing their first game in Washington, so that you can get there on a bus ride. So Washington, D.C., and then they have to fly to Indiana to play the Fever. They won't be getting a charter flight. So we're seeing sort of a little bit of a unequal thing going on here where, okay, the league is saying, oh yes, we are starting our charter flight program and it's going to be for everyone and it's going to be during the regular season. But it seems like not every team is going to be able to use it at the start of the season. And so that's very concerning.
And there's no plans as of yet to rectify that at all, right? Like this is still just an open-ended issue for the moment.
That's all I know. I mean, the fact that Commissioner Engelbert has not been made available to media members to discuss this more at length is really, it is troubling because there is so much speculation going on right now. I've spoken to colleagues who say, well, wait, how does this sort of happen on a dime? Does that mean that the NBA stepped in and is going to help fund this for the WNBA? We don't have enough information to know.
That's great reporting. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we're going to talk more in our bonus episode in a bit about some of these issues. But maybe we can end here just wondering with, you know, the announcement that there's going to be an expansion team in Toronto, which hasn't been confirmed by the WNBA yet, but that reporting seems solid to me, that would be the 14th team following Golden State as the 13th. There's been talk about, you know, wanting to get up to 16 teams, but there's also been some dissatisfaction, Jackie, about the pace of expansion. And there's been dissatisfaction about this charter issue. And the game is obviously growing a huge amount, and this is going to be a huge and potentially transformative year for the league. But I'm just curious about Cathy Engelbert and whether it's players, owners, media, like what's the level of satisfaction with her as a kind of steward of the league? And yeah, it's a kind of big question, but I'm just curious what her kind of approval rating is in WNBA circles dealing with all of these massive and important issues.
So I would say, so that's a very loaded question, obviously, but I think where I want to start is looking relatively to just the history of the WNBA. And I would say probably Cathy Engelbert has been the most impactful head of the league since probably Val Ackerman, who I believe was the first president. And she wasn't even a commissioner. She was a president. And I think that really speaks quite loudly. If you think about what Kathy Engelbert has been able to accomplish in her tenure, it is probably more than what all of the previous presidents, besides maybe Ackerman, have accomplished altogether. I do happen to believe that the halt and the delay on expansion comes from the collective trauma that this league suffered in around 2008, around the time of the financial crisis, where you saw all of these teams folding.
The Houston Comets.
Yes, the Houston Comets, who, oh man, if they were to be revived, what a wonderful thing that would be. But the reason for it was the conventional wisdom was, okay, well, professional women's sports, that doesn't make any money. But we know that the conventional wisdom now is that you don't make money until you invest in something and invest in it wholeheartedly. And it's really quite something to look at how that narrative has really changed over time. So, but when it comes to Kathy's approval rating, she has to deal with this very tough dynamic where she has newer owners like the Mark Davises, the Joe Tsais, who are willing to just spend whatever they want on their teams. And she has to deal with those folks alongside owners that have been in this league for longer, who have been able to get by without spending as much as maybe Mark Davis and Joe Tsai want to spend. And so she has to deal with those conflicting styles of managing franchises. And that's really hard. That is really hard for someone to do, to try to make all of these stakeholders happy. And so she's not perfect. She has a very hard job. And I think relatively her approval rating is high, at least amongst the stakeholders.
Jackie Powell covers the New York Liberty for the women's basketball site The Next. You can also listen to her talk about the WNBA on the Locked On Women's Basketball podcast. And you can listen to her in our Slate Plus bonus episode coming in a bit, where we will talk about such things as A'ja Wilson's signature shoe. Jackie, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you.
Up next, our own Joel Anderson has an interview with the WNBA's Maddie Siegrist. Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Hi, this is Dahlia Lithwick, host of Slate's legal podcast, Amicus. If you're listening to this show, you might be interested in Amicus's live show that we're hosting in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, May the 14th. My colleague, Mark Joseph Stern, and I will be talking to some amazing guests, including Sherrilyn Ifill and a sitting state Supreme Court justice, all about how originalism, a relatively recently invented way of interpreting the Constitution, has taken over the Supreme Court and radically reshaped the law. It's been doctrinal rocket fuel for the conservative legal movement and facilitated the rolling back of abortion rights, the expansion of gun rights, and the obliteration of the separation of church and state. And as another wildly consequential Supreme Court term careers to its end, the court's originalists are on a tear. But there's something you can do about it, and we hope you'll join us in D.C. on May 14th to explore the possible pathways out of the current situation. Go to slate.com/Amicus Live for tickets.
The big storyline in the WNBA this year is about the incoming rookie class, especially number 1 overall pick, Caitlin Clark. So I talked to someone who's recently been through all of that and has a fairly good idea of the league that awaits. Second-year forward Maddie Siegrist was the number 3 overall pick in the 2023 WNBA draft, going to the Dallas Wings. At Villanova, Siegrist was a 2-time Big East Player of the Year and the Big East all-time leading scorer. In her rookie year in Dallas, Siegrist provided depth off the bench for a team that had its best season since 2008, when the franchise was still in Detroit. The Wings still lost in a 3-game second-round sweep to the Aces, but they kept it close at times. If Dallas is to become a real contender this season, though, it'll likely be because Siegrist gets closer to becoming the high-scoring forward she was at Villanova. For our hang-up-in listeners, I should note here that this segment was recorded before the charter flight announcement. So just so you get a heads up. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Maddie.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So obviously your rookie season was a major adjustment, as all rookie seasons are, and especially in the WNBA, where many first-round picks don't even necessarily make the team or the final roster. So can you just, for people that don't understand like how difficult the competition is at that level, can you talk about that and like how even the worst teams in the leagues have a hell of a lot of talent?
I mean, it's just extremely competitive. It's 144 of the best players in the world. And, you might be the best player in college, but, you're 22 years old playing against, players who have been in this league for 10, 15, 20 years. So, there's times where experience really, really shows, especially, the WNBA is such a quick turnaround when the college season ends. It's almost like 3 weeks later, you're in a WNBA game. So I think that makes the adjustment a little bit harder for players. But, once you get in the flow, then you're just playing basketball.
Well, right. So you finished your season in the tournament, which is pretty close to the drafts. I mean, it's not like you had a lot of time or build up to get ready for your first season. So what did you do, if anything, to prepare yourself for that rookie year?
Yeah. So mine was, I feel like it was crazy, but, we ended, I think it was the last week in March, we played in the Sweet 16. And then, I had a COVID year, so I went home, decided that I was going to, declare for the draft and not stay at Villanova another year. And then the whole following week were all the National Player of the Award ceremonies. So one was in LA, one was in Dallas, one was in New York. And then, you go back to New York for the draft. I think April 10th is the draft. So like that whole week leading up, you're working out wherever you can, whenever you can. And then you get drafted. We had 2 days of orientation. I went to my class on that night coming back. And then I was like, I think this is my last class. Like I got to leave on Monday. So you pack your whole dorm up and then you move and then you go to your new team. And it's just, it's so exciting and so many new things all at once.
Well, that must have been a crazy whirlwind too, right? Because you're moving to a city, obviously, that you not lived in before. So like, who takes care of all of that? Does the team do that for you to get you set up in Arlington or whatever it was you had to live, or what?
Yeah. So your team really they provide housing, furniture, all that stuff. So you're set up pretty good. Your agents, make sure everything, goes well for you and they look out for you. So in terms of that, you're just really bringing your clothes. At least for me, that was the case. Like you're just packing your clothes, but then you have like a week before camp starts. You're trying to like get the lay of the land. Like, where are you going to eat? Like for me, I was living with 4 of my best friends in college in like an apartment to all of a sudden, like, now whatever I put in the fridge, it's just me eating it. So it's like, you don't have to get a huge bag. Like it's just you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, and this is one of the things I think a lot of people miss about the transition from being an upperclassman in college to a rookie in a professional league, is that that's a tremendous shift, right? Like, I mean, you left your friends behind, like you don't know where you are. You don't even get a lot of lead in to get used to any of this stuff, right? Like you're just in it all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's almost like, you're becoming adult, like all in a week. Just because, college sports, everything is really laid out, study hall, class, like there's not a lot of room. Training camps 10 to 2, and then it's like, what do you do the rest of your day? Like you gotta figure that out. And I was so fortunate on the Wings. There were so many players that were on the younger side, so it's like we had a lot in common. They either were 1 or 2 years out of school, just like similar spots I was in. So that definitely helped with the adjustment, and our vets were great, which also helps. Like they were taking me to dinner, like looking out for you, which is great.
So one of my favorite podcasts is the Knuckleheads with Darius Miles and Quentin Richardson. And their first question to guests, as you may or may not know, is when you got to the league, who was the first player to bust your ass? So that's actually what I want to ask you. So who was it, or what was like your welcome to the league rookie moment?
I'm not sure if it was like in the first few games, but we played. I came off a screen from Brittany Griner. It actually was a charge, but I was like on the ground for a minute. I just was like fighting over the screen, and I just laid there for a second. And my teammates came over, they grabbed me. They're like cheering because you got the charge. I'm like, I don't know if that was worth it. Like,
was there anybody that you played against as a rookie that was like, you won't believe how good this person is? Like, I you didn't even know it. There was no way to know, like even on watching them on tape.
I feel like Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Alyssa Thomas, like, they're great, but then all of a sudden, like, there's nothing you could do to stop them. Like, we were playing Brianna Stewart in one of the games in New York. I think she had like 40. By the time then they put me on her, I'm like, all right, well, it can't be worse. Like, whatever. And, it's just shot after shot. And you're like, wow, like, this is incredible. Especially you watch all these players. And then I feel like the first like month is like the whole wow factor. You're like, player that I watched my whole life. And then you're like, all right, now I got to go do the best I can and try to stop them.
There's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about the rookie wage scale in the WNBA, and maybe even a lot of surprise at the disparity between what women's basketball players make in this country and what the men do. And so I was curious to know, like, I mean, I'm sure you were primed for it, but like, what do you think of that disparity? And has it at all impacted your approach to what you do in the off season?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to consider everything in the off season, especially the WNBA is so competitive. So roster spots, year to year, it changes with camp. So I think, more and more players aren't going overseas now because they have options. Like, I was able to work at Villanova and do some marketing stuff, like some sponsorships, but not everybody has that opportunity. Some players are more inclined to go overseas. I think the goal would be that, players don't have to go overseas. More and more eyes are going to continue to stay on women's basketball and, the WNBA. That's, I think there's a lot of rookies that are going to bring a lot of eyes, which is great because I think, once you see the game, you see how great it is. That's how, you make money, stuff like that. But I do think it's going to continue to grow. And I think we've seen that in the last 5 years, how much the WNBA's like salaries have grown. And I think, it's exciting to see in the next 5 how it's going to grow even more and try to, get that gap a little bit smaller for sure.
You said it's good to have those eyes. Is it great? Like, I mean, you've had a chance to sort of see, all of the dueling storylines, right, in the last few months, right? Whether it's the Angel Reese stuff, whether it's the way, the treatment of Caitlin Clark, and I'm going to ask you about her in a second, but has it been an adjustment? Like, have you even noticed, like, in terms of media attention or the way that people respond to you on social media, like, has that attention actually been good for you and you think the game?
So I can really just speak, like, for me personally, like, I would say I was fortunate that my junior and senior year at Villanova, I got a lot of national attention, a lot of attention on social media. And, it is sometimes like you're more conscious of everything you're doing, everything you're posting, obviously. So from that, like, you got to think a little bit more than like maybe your average teammate in college. So I think that prepared me. And then also seeing like, Arike, like how big of a following, like she's in the airport, people stop her all the time. If I'm not wearing like Dallas or Villanova clothes, like sometimes you get stopped, sometimes you won't. But I think, that comes with it. That's why, NBA, they charter every single flight because of reasons like that. But I think in some ways, it's good because it's going to continue to grow the game and grow the revenue and grow, the teams. The biggest thing is like to add more teams to WNBA. So more of these great players are able to make roster spots and make teams. But, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes, like, it's tough, like, especially social media now, everything you do can get, twisted or one picture or one everything. So just, you got to be more conscious of stuff like that.
We did talk about Caitlin Clark, and I did want to ask you about her because obviously, she's sort of the major storyline coming into the year, right? Like, that's a lot of people paying attention to her. So I did see a previous interview, and you even mentioned it here, that you hope people have some grace for her. So I'm just curious to know, like, you had a chance to watch her. I didn't see that you ever played against her in college.
So, yeah, I haven't played against her a ton, but I knew her last year from, a bunch of the awards and stuff like that. And she's a great player. I think what she's done for the game is phenomenal. The amount of attention that's been on her, I think, that's a lot for any 22-year-old in the world. Like, I couldn't, that's a lot. I think she's handled it really well. But I do think, you got to give her some grace. She might come out in the first game and have 25, but she could have for it too. It doesn't mean she's a bad player. It means, there's an adjustment period, whether it's a month, a year, 2 years, 3 years. Like, Kelsey Plum's a great example. It took her a few years to figure things out, and now she's one of the best, if not, one of the best guards in the league. So I think, for all the fans to keep in mind, like, you might be like, oh, you're top rookie coming in, but you're in year 0 in the WNBA. Like, these vets are like year 8, year 10, and like there's a time like experience really does, you can't teach experience. It's not a skill. So I do think you just got to give grace to all the rookies, because, it might not look exactly how the fans want. And some of the fans, you always want your players to play. Like, that's just how it goes.
I don't even know. I'm asking you this, but and you may not have anything to say about it, but I'm just going to ask you. I'm just kind of stepping back for a little, because I've been asking you about like the nitty gritty of it, but like you made it to the WNBA. Like, I'm sure that's something that you dreamed about as a kid, or was it? Like, how closely did you follow the WNBA as a kid? And like, did you have a favorite team and a favorite player and all that good stuff?
So when New York Liberty, they played in Westchester, that was about an hour from my house. So growing up, like each year we probably went to a few games. My dad would take me and my sister. So seeing that was great, to be able to see, professional women's league. But I don't even think I grasped it, like how good of players they were, until I was probably in high school. And then you see like how small of a percentage from the best players in college go there. And then, it was probably like my sophomore year of college that I realized like this is a really real possibility that you're going to have this opportunity, which is just so exciting. And, that's what you work for when you're in college. Like, it's in the back of your mind, but you're just enjoying what you're doing then. Like, so for me, it was something I wanted to do in the future, but I never looked too deep into it until it was my senior year. And like, then I was like, okay, like this is my next step.
When you were at Villanova, that was a time of real change in college sports, right? Like the transfer portal, NIL opportunities, and even still, like you may have not been able to avail yourself, because I mean, a lot of that stuff is still kind of like percolating now, right? Like there's still a lot more opportunities and more money coming into it, particularly women's basketball. So like, how was that to navigate? And like, do you wish now you kind of like, man, you said you could have stayed, like you could have stayed in school for another year. You could have the COVID year. Like, how difficult was it? Like, were you like, nah, I'm ready to go on and get my pro money? It
was difficult just because I loved Villanova so much. I loved, my teammates, and my senior year was like the storybook. Like everything that could have went right. And then when I was sitting there, I knew in my mind and my heart it was time to go, just because, I had played. It was everything I'd wanted. And if I could have relived that last year forever, but like, that's not how it works. And there's no crystal ball. And like, it was time for me to like grow as a person and move on and, have a new challenge. But just to see the way NIL and like the portal, it's so crazy because, when I first got there, you had to sit out a year if you transferred. There was no NIL. And then like that first year, I think maybe my sophomore, junior year when NIL came, I was the only one on my team who had any type of deal. And then, to now the team, I think everybody has something. So, whether it's a collective or like social media deal. So it's interesting to see it grow. I'm happy players can benefit from it for sure.
What deals did you have, if you don't mind me asking?
Like the first year that first summer, I think was just like camps, like t-shirts, stuff like that. And then, last year, like towards March Madness, that was when it really picked up. I got a bunch like TurboTax, Powerade, SoFi. So some good ones for sure.
You did mention too that you started this position at Villanova, where you're a special assistant to the senior women's administrator, right? It kind of seems like you're already thinking about your, post-playing career future. So how did this come about, and like, what do they have you doing? What do you want to do with it?
So I think like I want to stay in sports, definitely. Whether it's, coaching, administrative side, like I was fortunate to do a little bit of everything this year. Some like donors, like fundraising, that kind of thing was really cool because, as a player, you're worried about practice games. You don't see anything else. So it was cool to see how it works and stuff like that. And, my coach called me last year, I think it was July or August, and said, hey, we'd love to have you back. And it was just such a quick college season, WNBA. I knew my body needed a break, and overseas wasn't, probably the best option last year for me. So I was like, this is great. I get the best of both worlds. I was able to play AU, which was in Dallas, which was huge and great for me. I'm from New York, so it's a couple hours drive. So I was able to be home a lot more. Like I was home, I've never spent the 26th of December home before. I'm like, oh, this is nice. You guys all still hang out, like, because you're always driving back for practice that day. So it was nice just to, spend holidays at home and like, really prepare for, the season, like have a real off season where you're working on something and you're working on your body.
You mentioned, that you didn't go, you didn't think going overseas was right for you. Is that something that you still like have as an option or that you would like to maybe explore one day or no?
Yeah, definitely. I think, for me, it'll be year to year, like, where I'm at physically, where my body's at, what options you have for the off season. I think, it'll just be like, each year, something I decide. I'm definitely not against it. I'm definitely not dead set on going every year. So definitely keep my options open and see where I'm at.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Maddie. Obviously, we'll be following you this season, and maybe we'll have you back on if the Wings make the finals. Look, we won't put it on the finals. You can come back without having to go to the finals, but maybe that might be the better way to do it, though, right?
All right. I like it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maddie. Appreciate it.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Now it is time for After Balls, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. I am guessing I'm not the only person who Googled Hubie Brown age while watching this weekend's Thunder Mavericks game, which Brown was broadcasting on ABC. And the answer is 90. Hubie Brown, two-time NBA Coach of the Year, stopped coaching in the NBA 20 years ago for health reasons, is still calling NBA games at 90 years old, and getting a handshake from Kyrie Irving before tip-off. Here's how Hubie called it.
This is two Jersey guys making a little handshake.
Just two Jersey guys. A Reddit thread posted a few days ago, Joel, noted that Hubie, born September 25th, 1933, is 16 years older than the NBA, which didn't exist until October of 1949. I'll also note that Hubie graduated from Niagara in 1955, the year that Bill Russell in San Francisco won the first of their two straight national titles. He was later an assistant coach at Duke, leaving 8 years before Coach K got there. He was an assistant for the Milwaukee Bucks when Kareem and Oscar were still on the team. And he was the head coach for the Kentucky Colonels when the ABA was still a going concern. First worked as a broadcaster for the USA Network in 1982, where, as Alex Wolf noted in a piece for Sports Illustrated back then, he developed a reputation for being the most detail-oriented basketball broadcaster ever. As his broadcast partner from those days, Al Albert, said in that piece, Hubie likes to point out how football telecasts are also technical and how people love to hear how scientific that game really is. Why can't basketball analysis be done in the same way? So, Hubie Brown, back then, ahead of his time. 42 years later, his time has still not run out, and hopefully it won't run out anytime soon. Joel, what is your Hubie Brown?
Hubie Brown, for a time in my life, was like, I feel like he was 78 years old for like 13 years. So I was shocked to know that he's 90, but also kind of not shocked, if that makes sense. Anyway, my Hubie Brown. So if you're one of the hundreds of fans of the Arena Football League, then you probably had a pretty bad weekend. The last post from the league's official account on X, or as most people call it Twitter, is a promotion for its game Saturday night. The Rapid City Marshals versus the Billings Outlaws at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. The game was scheduled to be aired on something called the VYRE network. I think it's VIRE network. If you go to VYRE's account, the streaming service's last post is from early Saturday morning and says, something huge, and they spelled huge with a D, is coming with sports. We had a great meeting with some team owners, and we plan on amplifying the next generation in sports with this. Ellipses. Stay tuned. I hope fans didn't take that tweet to heart because the Marshals Outlaws game never got played Saturday night. And as a result, the game obviously never aired on that channel. Here's apparently what happened. According to Rapid City AM radio station KOTA, the problem started before kickoff when Rapid City players demanded their full salaries. When they didn't get their money, the game was canceled. Here's a statement from the Marshals ownership group. We regret to confirm the cancellation of tonight's game due to the continuous ongoing issues within the AFL and their inability to meet the commitments made to the owners, teams, players, and coaches. All ticket holders will be refunded for this evening's game. As we have more information, we will share it in the upcoming days. And here's another statement from Stephen Titus, owner of the Billings Outlaws, who was understandably upset after bringing his team 300 miles to South Dakota for a forfeit. It is with regret that I inform our Outlaws family of the Rapid City Marshals refusing to play tonight's game. Their refusal to play is due directly to incompetence, lies, and deceit by the current AFL front office. It's not exactly clear who's in the AFL's front office or who's actually running the whole operation, but whoever it is, that league is falling apart team by team. On Sunday, the league's Philadelphia Soul franchise announced that it was taking a pause for the 2024 season after just 2 games. The Soul had previously missed their flight to Louisiana to play the Louisiana Voodoo. Josh, I'm sure you're a Voodoo fan. And were replaced by an indoor team from another league. The AFL had taken over ownership of the Soul after a group led by former NBA player and Philly native Mustafa Shakur backed out, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Little more than a week earlier, the Iowa Rampage shut down its season 2. In their press release announcing the decision, team owners blasted AFL Commissioner Lee Hutton for broken promises. Part of the statement read, Lee Hutton and his team have destroyed not only the revival of the AFL, but they have destroyed the hopes of players all over the U.S. Who the hell is Lee Hutton? Well, I know of him a little bit from the Houston area, where he was sort of a schoolboy legend from Lamarck High School in both football and the 110-meter hurdles. He went on to play a little football at the University of Minnesota and became a pretty big deal attorney in Minneapolis after college. And I'd mostly forgotten about him until I read in November that he was going to be a part of the AFL's rebirth as co-owner of the Minnesota Myth with his wife, the attorney Diana Hutton. But in a curious bit of planning, the Myth had not yet secured a place to play their games. They said they might play in St. Paul, but nobody was quite clear how that might work. There were going to be 16 teams in this new AFL, including the Nashville Cats, the West Texas Desert Hawks, and the Washington Wolfpack, which, for its part, is a better name than the current NFL team in that area has ever had. But Hutton and others were trading on the nostalgia many of us had for the original AFL, which launched in 1987. And if you were like me, you were up late watching ESPN in the 90s and aughts, you probably saw some of those games. They were played on a 66 by 28 yard field, which made for a much faster and violent game. Things seemed so promising for the league at that point that even the NFL held an option to purchase a majority interest in the league. Some of the greats in AFL history, and all of these people made it into the Hall of Fame, include Eddie Touchdown Brown, father of Antonio Brown, and Jay Gruden as a quarterback for the Tampa Bay Storm and the Orlando Predators. But it was less about the players and more about the insanity of that many players in a compressed space. It was a lot of fun to watch sometimes, even if the league didn't make much money. The first version flamed out in 2008, and a second AFL emerged in 2010 and did well for a while. But when the NFL didn't come to save the league with its millions, the league simply couldn't survive a couple of bankruptcies, and the AFL ended operations in 2019. But if the last few weeks are any indication, the third version of the AFL still doesn't have any money and seems on its way to a short run. The league was supposed to start on April 27th, but not much has gone according to plan since then. 3 teams have already folded, including the aforementioned Rampage and Soul and the Georgia Force, which has had players circulate a GoFundMe for out-of-state players who can't afford to get home. The team's QB Justin Arth said on the page that they hadn't been paid in 3 weeks, nor had they been provided with food. They have apparently raised a little more than their goal of $2,145. And not surprisingly, the league's broadcast agreement with the NFL Network didn't happen either. But the sports business website Front Office Sports says no games have aired on the channel or VYRE apparently, and the deal has been terminated. And Lee Hutton and the Minnesota Myth? Well, the Myth was supposed to host the Albany Firebirds on Saturday at the Target Center, where the Timberwolves play their home games. And I can understand why everyone in Minnesota may not have expected them to still be playing now, but the Myth couldn't find a new home soon enough, and the game was moved to Albany for Monday. Not so fast. The Firebirds said the game would be canceled after the Myth said they couldn't make the trip to New York. Already Myth head coach Ricky Foggie resigned last week after 2 games, and he was replaced by the special teams coordinator. Foggie retweeted a user Friday on X who wrote, "I can't wait to see Lee Hutton get what's coming to him for orchestrating this mess that hurt so many players, coaches, and staff members who worked tirelessly for nothing." And where the hell is Lee Hutton? It seems few people have heard from him in weeks. And if you go to social media, you'll see a number of players or other executives talking about how they can't get a hold of the guy at all. The head coach of the Louisiana Voodoo posted a meme of Hutton on a milk carton as if he's missing. Also written on the carton, "Have you seen me? If found, contact the AFL owners." One of those owners, the aforementioned Stephen Titus of Rapid City, has been beating this particular drum for a while. Here's a recent appearance of his on Fox Sports Radio in Rapid City.
As of today, I don't think any team owner has talked to our current commissioner. Our current commissioner hasn't, is kind of hiding. I don't know what he's doing, I don't know what's going on with Lee Hutton. No one's talked to him. There's been promises for the CIF teams for payment. We just found out today that our officials haven't been paid. The AFL, under his leadership, has not fulfilled many obligations whatsoever.
So hang up and listeners. If you see Lee Hutton out there anywhere, tell him that a lot of angry people, some of them large football players, are looking for him, and he better return some calls and emails. I reached out for comment yesterday, but obviously haven't heard back yet. And if you happen to hear this, Lee, you can always email me your side of the story at joel.anderson@slate.com. But for their sake, I hope the AFL's players and coaches hear back from you before I do.
That was great, Joel. The AFL is like a zombie brand, and we've seen that a lot in the last few years of brands getting revived. Some of them in the media, like the Sports Illustrated we know now isn't the same as the Sports Illustrated back then. A lot of great people working there, but not quite the same. Anyway, it is very funny that the team is called the Minnesota Myth. If you want to name your team the Minnesota Myth, you better be damn sure that they're going to exist, or else you're kind of putting yourself in for a world of hurt.
Absolutely. And also just from, some cursory reporting or whatever, it doesn't seem like the Huttons are in this together anymore. Without saying too much, it doesn't seem like they're working as a partnership anymore. So it's funny that that's the team where this all centers around too. Like this was this is supposed to be one of the foundational franchises, and boom, nowhere to play, can't afford to go anywhere, can't find the owners. Sounds pretty AFL, actually.
That is all for this episode, but we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now. It features our guest Jackie Powell of The Next, and we're talking about a bunch of really interesting WNBA stuff, TV deals, shoes. You got to tune in to hear all of the chatter. To hear that, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We'll see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Joel Anderson, I'm Josh Levine. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today and get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Terms and conditions apply.